purposely picked my Street Fighter background for you, so
Ooh, who's your character?
I can't remember the names.
Yeah, I mean, I got Sagat and M. Bison, and Blanca was the little guy that was
Yep.
from Swamp, I think. That's about where I end.
That's the only video game I can play now with my kids. That's the only one I don't know. I just hit all the buttons, but whatever.
Just button mash, and or just low kick people relentlessly. That's,
Pat, I've been anticipating what you're going to do with the rethinking the big patterns. And like I said, I've seen you present a lot of your material. I haven't seen it all, so I'm very interested. Um, what is the one thing that people should expect, or one of the big things that people should expect from this sort of online virtual seminar that you're holding?
yeah, it's funny because I've written the book for this topic, and it's currently in edits, and I've got people working on the graphic design part of it as well, and it should be done. I'm hoping by December, but you never know. Like there's a lot involved with making a book, and the interesting thing is that the editor originally didn't love the title, Rethinking the Big Patterns. It was kind of, and I was like, she was like, do you have any other ideas for what you were going to call it? And I was like, I don't know. And she's like, well, what's the book about? And I'm like, there's a lot to it. Like it's 187,000 words that goes into this book. And like, and I keep having people ask me to give the elevator pitch version of it, or to try to make like marketable commercials that last a minute for it and stuff like that. And it's like, it's a lot to try to jam into like a quick description, but I know like Mike Boyle has his certified functional strength coach seminar. People teach these model kinds of seminars, and this is my model. So it's the holistic examination of training to me. Like I think the last thing I came up with for like a one sentence kind of deal was something along the lines of like the comprehensive menu of available human training options, involving like the standardization of how they should be done to determine whether or not the movement is right or wrong, and how to be able to create a progressive logical approach to implementing training types and how to move them forward. So it's to me like the seminar and the topic is the biggest of big picture things. It just so happens, but like it's just that it has a biomechanics bend to it. It's like more over on that side of the spectrum as opposed to physiology as the primary thing. So it was like I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of great people in exercise and nutrition from the standpoint of like I think of some of these nutrition people that are phenomenal in terms of being able to quantitatively give you a great diet. They can give you these macro guidelines, and like I'm using the Renaissance Periodization Diet app, and I've just fallen in love with the thing. It makes my life so much easier in terms of it tells me how many carbs and fats and proteins to eat at each meal. And then I can kind of pull the options out of whatever foods I want to fit into those things. And it's worked amazingly well. And, I know Mike Israetel, and Nick Shaw, those guys are really bright guys. And they made a great product. And it's like, I trust them because I know how dedicated they are to all of the background information regarding nutrition. And then it's like this product just kind of implements it for you. Like I can just literally plug and play, and I just eat what it tells me to eat, and it's bringing me to the numerical outcomes that I want. And it's very impressive how effective it is. And but I think about people that live on that side in the nutrition world, and they're so locked in. And then I think about people that are on like the spreadsheet exercise program design side of exercise science, and I feel like they are so locked in. They're so good at what they do. It's like a beautiful equation, and they know how to progress you. And you see these charts and volume and intensity waves, and it's like, man, just just do how much they're telling you to do and they're going to bring you to the promised land. And I feel like there's such a lacking piece in the world of biomechanics. And that's probably my primary love is biomechanics above and beyond the nutrition side and the physiology programming side. And this is my attempt to make this kind of all encompassing model for biomechanics in terms of like, if you're, I try to think like, if I'm going to do this for physiology, it's like I have to identify all of the systems and the subsystems of the human body. And I have to tell you how they work and what's involved and all this kind of stuff. And if I'm going to do it with nutrition, I have to do it with all of the macro and micronutrients and whenever you're doing that, you have to create this first just identifying literally everything that exists. And then following that, you can begin to categorize and put things into boxes. And then following that, you can kind of give guidance in terms of best approaches inside of those things. It's like, yeah, you should be eating 425 grams of carbohydrates on your training days, and we're going to break it up into 5 meals a day. And it's probably best if the carbohydrates aren't all from like Skittles, so it's like Skittles is a bad tool maybe, so maybe rice is a better choice. So but ultimately, like, we're giving you these tools to bring you to where you're trying to go. And so I almost feel like there should be like this trinity of program design and the quantitative elements involved with it, nutrition and the program designs, and really the quantitative and qualitative elements of it, nutrition and the quantitative and qualitative elements of it, and then an analysis of biomechanics and human movement and the qualitative and quantitative components of it. And that to me, I'm trying to fill in this third circle that I feel like has been very wishy-washy. When I think about movement people, oftentimes like there's kind of like, I've got yoga people, I've got hippies, I've got a lot of people with no shirts and no shoes on doing God knows what. I've got, and look, like I love these people. Like I work with some of these guys, but somebody needs to come along and like make a scientific taxonomy and rule book to that. And that's what I'm good at. So it's just that there's so much involved when you try to tackle something like that. And I ended up breaking it up into 7 different main sections that kind of walk you through everything. And in a lot of ways, I've tried to say to people like the first 4 pillars are what you need to become a cashier at McDonald's. Okay. And a cashier at McDonald's, they don't really understand the process of how the burger's made. They don't understand the mechanisms involved. They just know that when somebody orders a number 1, that they hit that button. And when somebody orders a Big Mac, they hit the button that has the picture of the Big Mac. And ultimately, like, the process works and the food gets delivered to the right person and all that kind of stuff. And then pillars 5, 6, and 7 basically explain the mechanistic process of how McDonald's as an entity operates in some ways. So that's like, for me, like, if you're a coach and all you want to do is be able to just have a system that you can follow and a basic rule book to follow to know whether or not people are doing exercises properly. Pillars 1 through 4, boom, those are kind of like your diet app, bring you to the promised land, plug things in, hack away at it. And then 5, 6, and 7 are for like the people that want to be the architect and be able to design their own blueprints and really have like master strokes of knowing how to put people into the right exercise specifically for them to really guide precision and all that kind of stuff. So it's a long story, kind of long. That's sort of the essence of this thing.
So if I'm like you were saying for pillars 1 to 4, it's kind of targeting sort of the basic coach, personal trainer, who's working with a variety of clients. Would you say Um, because I just think of the people out there, and there's some people they're in kind of boxes too, to some degree, pardon the pun,
Mhm.
but there's going to be people who are like the weight room coach.
Yep.
And then there's going to be, like you said, there's this weird nebulous movement coach area where it could be yoga, agility, anything where they're moving, running even.
Yep.
And then there may even be another group that's even not weight room, not movement, maybe a combination of mishmash. So you're kind of addressing all of those things. So if somebody says I just want weight room stuff, it kind of fits into your template, but
Yep.
also can fit into some of these body weight, all these other things as well, and even from a
Yep.
rehab point of view as well, I would assume.
Yep. That's kind of it. Like I have like pillar one is movement quality. And it doesn't mean like how well do you move. It's like a qualitative breakdown of things that exist. So it's like I've got 13 patterns that are trainable. And I break it down into um, control patterns, athletic patterns, and resistance patterns. And so it's like, hey, if you want just the resistance patterns, that's hip dominant, knee dominant, horizontal push and pull, vertical push and pull. Boom, done, easy. If you're working with athletic populations, then you have to deal with this other group of patterns, which is locomotion, change of direction, triple extension, and throwing. And then if you're working with people maybe that are either special populations, such as people that might have asthma or other kinds of chronic conditions or something like that, or if you're working with like athletes that need either to increase range of motion, change range of motion, or when you kind of get into this weird nebulous divide between rehab and training, that's kind of like the breathing pattern as well as the core pelvic exercises and core thoracic exercises, core like control patterns. So yeah, it's kind of like we've got all the things and they're divided. And I reference you quite a bit in this, and I don't know if you know this or not, but I call you the great gardener of the performance world. And I always ask people, well, what do you think about when you think of great gardeners? When I think of them, I think of people that don't necessarily add things, but people that prune the tree and remove the unnecessary. And that's something I've taken away from you a number of times, is that look, you don't need to do all this. Okay, you really don't. What I've tried to create with this seminar is here's the full playbook, like, and not just playbook of one team. This is the playbook of all the NFL teams, like every single one of them. We've got Belichick and Reed and Holmgren from the past and Seifert. We've got everything you could ever imagine. RPO, West Coast, run and shoot, ground and pound. You know what a terrible game plan would be to try to use all of them at the same time. You don't have a system now, you have garbage. What you need to do is figure out what you're actually going to do. Like a good playbook is one that only really uses the ones that make sense for what you're dealing with, your personnel and the logistics of your coaching staff and everything else. It's not about adding, it's about figuring out what you don't need. Like here's everything that's available, but to me, I'm trying to carve a design with my program design. I'm not just trying to have a smattering of everything. It's not a Jackson Pollock. It's like like more of like, I picture almost like a bonsai tree or something like that has a very specific kind of a shape emerging from it. I didn't I think you prepped me for that with the Street Fighter background. Um,
Well, yeah, I mean that's the whole martial arts thing. It's like I think a lot of people want to take a course in different martial karate, aikido, whatever, and then they're like, oh, I'm just going to combine all of them, and it's like, well, no, it depends on who you're fighting, it depends on your weight class maybe. So I think I agree with you. I think that's the biggest problem right now in fitness and strength and conditioning is, oh, I went to that seminar, so I'm going to do that. And I'll even see people using some of my stuff in incompatible ways, and it kind of it kind of bothers me a bit because I don't think they've truly understood the essence of what you're talking about in terms of application side.
yeah, I'm sure it's got to drive you nuts. I mean, uh, and you what you were asking about was you were kind of initially before I started answering with talking about pillar one and the qualities. a little bit about like weight room people, movement people, rehab people, you know, the niches that kind of emerged. And pillar one to me is just like, here's everything that's available. Like, you know, I talk a lot about Carolus Linnaeus when I talk about pillar one, the guy that created the Systema Naturae, the, you know, kingdom, phylum, order, class, species, genus, you know, where it's like you can literally name any life form if you work your way through that taxonomy. And then there's common names that go along with it. Like, I don't know, like a lion is a lion in our common terminology, but it's like, it's a mammal, it's a vertebrate, it's a feline, it's in the Panthera kind of group. And like, I can scientifically name this thing and describe it through this system. And I ultimately tried to do that with pillar one, where I have the qualities, and then I have the stances that you can potentially do them in, and I have the planes that you can do them in. So you can begin to describe these activities. Like, it could be a change of direction motor pattern that's done, that features a front back stance, and it's going to be in the sagittal plane. And you start thinking about it, you're like, okay, well, that could be like running forward, stopping, and backpedaling. Like, something like that makes sense within that descriptive nature.
Yeah,
Um,
you could probably go through an entire football team and look at each position and go, okay, O line, you know, they're a little different than obviously D line,
yeah,
and just you know, figure out what those patterns are, and then assign your exercises.
that's exactly it. You know, it's like, yeah, my offensive linemen need to do a little bit more bilateral work. You know, their feet are often more often than the D backs and receivers. Their feet are next to each other, and they're kind of pushing, and they're sort of moving side to side. Like, it's a different stance. And you know, and the planes that they're working in, if they turn, if they're doing transverse plane movement, that means that the quarterback's getting killed. Like, I want them to not turn so much. Whereas,
Or they're holding.
right, yeah, yeah, like they just tackled somebody. My slot receivers, on the other hand, I need those guys to be able to turn. I need them to be able to run, rotate, catch the ball. So if it's a different animal. So you know, one of the things you know, these things always come to my head. Like, I don't even teach this thing with any slides or anything anymore. It's 2 days. I just go 9 to 5, 9 to 5.
Mhm.
But it's like, I get into it, and like the seminar itself unfolds through the pillars. But one of the primary things is I'm trying to identify that which is different, you know, because everything is kind of things are different from each other. Like, there are different buckets that exist, and I love the way that, you know, you and Charlie broke down the, you know, the 100 meters or the 200 meters, and then show kind of like, hey, this distance 0 to 10 meters is my more absolute strength, and here are the exercises that are absolute strength in nature, and then 10 to 20 is going to be speed strength, and then 20 out to 30 is elastic, and then 30 and beyond is going to be more speed endurance. So you have to do activities that are elastic to build the elastic qualities for this component. I have to do the strength exercises because it is different, even though it's just running, you know what I mean? But there's different phases of it, and the different specific things that need to be developed are important. And you know, so, and then you start looking at other, you know, just the bigger picture of training of all kinds, and there's just big differences. Like, I always say, you know, one of the examples I try to give is the Charles Barkley golf swing. Like, Charles Barkley is arguably top 15 basketball player of all time. I mean, he was a great basketball player. I think highly underrated, and one of the top 15 worst golf swings of all time. And how could someone who, from, like, if I'm thinking about motor patterns of locomotion, change of direction, triple extension, how could I have somebody so elite in those things and so unbelievably bad at this other action? It's like, well, it's specificity. He doesn't do this thing. And then you see, like, I've seen plenty of guys that are elite strength athletes, and it's like you ask them to do a single leg deadlift, and it's embarrassing. Like, they can't do it, or even a split squat or something like that. It's like guys that can squat 800 pounds, that you put them in a split squat, they can't do it. And I'm not saying that it's like they need the split squat. They might not need the split squat at all, but but they can't do this other thing. It could literally, and for me, like the squat and split squat are in the same motor program of knee dominant, but the stance is different, where one is bilateral and the other one's front back staggered. And it's just different. I don't have scientific evidence at this point to be able to make the correlation coefficient and show it on that level. This is more like, over time, having seen people be excellent at one thing and suck at something else, and just saying, if you don't do this other thing, you're not going to be good at it by doing this thing. It's not the same thing. The transfer doesn't exist. So I try to divide it. Each motor program is different enough to where it lives in its own category. And then inside each motor program, if you can do it in a different stance, well, it's different enough. So if you got to figure out what stance do you need to do it in. Like, not everybody needs to do lateral squats, but if you're a French Open tennis player and you've got to kind of slide that way, you might need to be able to get into that lateral stance position and absorb some force with your hips and your thighs. And then, pillar 2 is the quantitative stuff, movement quantity. And I just divide that into load, velocity, and duration. And the same thing, like load, I divide into 3 realms: high, moderate, low. Velocity, I just try to be a simpleton with this: high, moderate, low. And duration, long, short, and moderate. And, just because, I try to give these very obvious examples, like, just let's take a look at locomotion. You're great at, the only stance you can really do locomotion is front back. But you're great at locomotion in the front back stance at high velocity for short duration. Does not mean you're going to be great at it with low velocity and long duration. Every single pattern, it's kind of the same thing. And you have to figure out which do you have to be good at. And but it kind of forms like a spreadsheet to me. This is what I mean by the McDonald's cashier. Pick your pattern, pick your stance, pick your plane. Now pick your load, pick your velocity, pick your duration. Some of them don't make sense. You can't do, hip dominant sagittal plane, high load, high velocity, long duration. It's just not a thing. So you get some dead ends, but for the most part, it's pretty easy from a program design standpoint. You look at the person you're working with, exclude the patterns that you don't need for them, exclude the loading zones you don't need, exclude the durations you don't need, exclude the velocities you don't need, see what's left, and then organize it coherently into a weekly training plan and a monthly and so on and so forth.
Yeah, over the longer term, or like, when you're doing the planning and you're talking about this in your course, do you talk about how things change from, month to month in terms of maybe what their goal is? Like, I know with the rough example would be like for sprinting, usually it's a short to long, but it's also like maybe we do all our heavier, deeper squatting in the first half of the program, and then we get away from it because we're loading them with more elastic running and all that. Do you talk about those types of issues?
I don't, because and it's funny because people are now, like, the people that have taken the course and are familiar with this, they're starting to ask the right questions that I call page 2 questions. It's like page 1 is this seminar, which is just literally identifying everything.
Okay.
Like explaining what's what within this model. And then page 2 would be, now that I understand this, what do I do with it? And that really comes down to program design. But it's hard to teach a program design course when you're teaching a model that can break out into all forms of program design, because that which is great program design for Olympic sprinters might not make sense for Major League Baseball players, just with the number of games they play, readiness, peaking. Like, how do you peak for 162 games?
Yeah.
So those are kind of more like, I'm going to provide this enormous backdrop. Like, this is the seminar that zooms the microscope out as far as it possibly can, and almost like, looks down at you with satellite vision and kind of like identifies the entire landscape. Now that we've done that, you kind of can zoom in, and this would be, I try to direct people towards other seminars a lot of the time too. And it's like, hey, I can't teach you everything there is to know about sprinting. Like, but I know a guy, I know a running mechanics professional seminar that's great. I can't teach you everything I know about kettlebells, but within this model, like kettlebell swings fall into hip dominant exercises that are bilateral stance, and a two-hand swing is a sagittal one. A single hand swing is a transverse one with the way that it turns your thorax. And in the hip dominant category for this, they're high velocity, moderate load, and probably moderate to long duration. You swing it pretty fast relative to other hip dominant exercises like a deadlift. And you don't do it for like one rep. Nobody one rep kettlebell swings. They do it for reps that last somewhere between 15 seconds and 2 minutes, unless they're competing in it. But it's kind of like, it pulls things out. It talks about, to me, like I categorize like the windmill in kettlebells as actually belonging to the throwing pattern. It's like a high load, low velocity throw in a lot of ways. Same thing with like the get up, the bottom part of a Turkish get up when you're getting off the ground. It's the same kind of action that you would use if you're throwing a ball, but it's a high load, low velocity version of it rather than higher velocity versions of the same motor pattern. Then it's like, well, how do I teach somebody how to program design for kettlebells and Olympic lifts and sprinting and everything else that could possibly exist? It's more like giving, one of the books that I read that made me want to teach this seminar was Ray Dalio's Principles.
Mhm.
And, he talks about how, he hated losing in the market, and, he wanted to be able to create principles that he could feed into computer algorithms so that he would decrease the likelihood of losing. And it was a similar thing here. Like I wanted to be able to build some universal principles that people could apply across all patterns. And that's something that kind of lives in, for me, the fourth pillar, which is movement progressions. And so I tried to make, and I made 10 rules, which is like, start, like telling people where to start and how to move, but knowing where to start is important. Like start static, start with a bilateral stance, start with short levers, minimize the effects of gravity, um, maximize reference, maximize constraints, minimize load, maximize reactive neuromuscular training. I run out of these, like I can't remember my own damn things when there's 10 of them. But even, you start listening to these things and I think to myself, well, how could I apply this to squatting? And I say to myself, well, I'm going to start static or pretty damn close to it. And so that means, it doesn't mean the whole body either. Like it could be the arms stay static. Like I'm not going to start somebody off with like while they squat down, they're pressing overhead with the barbell. Like that's way too hard. It doesn't make any damn sense. I'll at least have their arms static and having, hold a kettlebell or something, which is short levers and fits into some of the other things. But it's also like, well, how does this work if I'm talking about running mechanics in some ways? Well, a lot of times when you start with people, you'll start with them on the ground, which is minimizing the effects of gravity. And we're going to work arm swing. So they're static in some ways. You've taken away some moving pieces. Or tethered running is another great one, or an overhead stick to be able to take away some moving pieces. But like these are universal principles that I see come back over and over and over again, where when you're successful, like the whole point of knowing where to start people is, once people have the beginnings of knowing how to do something right, the light bulb goes off for them. They now have it's all a priori knowledge. They have something they can go back to, that they can say, oh, this is how we do it. This is the right thing. They have a frame of reference they can build off of. A lot of times I talk about, if I'm going to teach a kid how to shoot a basketball, what kind of shot should I start with? Should I start off with half court shots? Like that's a terrible idea. I'm gonna not give them any chance. They're gonna have no success, and they're gonna have nothing to build off of. I should probably start with a layup, okay? And if they really practice that and get the fundamentals in the form, we can bring it to other places and move off of that. And if I guarantee that Patrick Mahomes didn't start off with throwing no look passes. There's no way, no shot in hell. I'm sure he practiced the fundamentals over and over and over again. And if you practice the fundamentals enough, now the fundamentals can unfold and emerge in ways that like you'd never expect. Like he can run to the left and throw back to the right uh, in a way that like no one else can. But you would never start him there. Like it's like if he masters the basics to such a high level, he can unfold the essence of that pattern under any circumstances, and you don't really have to teach that. It's like if I'm working with a cross country team, I don't have to teach them how to run up every angle or how to run when there's roots. Like they just learn how to do it. It's a problem solving task. But if they never learned how to run in the first place, well, they're screwed. So it's a weird thing. But I spent enough time in the weight room and enough time trying to learn other things as an adult. Like trying to learn skiing was a great experience, terrible but great. But if I'm so glad I work with personal training with non-athletic people, because you'll see the weirdest things, and I hate it. I hate being unsuccessful with them. So can I find the foolproof formula that I can unfold every single time? When I'm not being successful, I say to myself, what am I doing here that's not in my own rule book? Oh, like I didn't start with the bilateral stance. I tried to teach this person the hip dominant pattern, and I started with a single leg deadlift. Bad decision. Like I need to put their feet next to each other. All of these things, they just keep coming back to it. But Dalio's book Principles was kind of where I took that from and wanted to create something so that literally any motor pattern that you're trying to coach, if you're being unsuccessful, you can go back to this list of 10 principles and it will tell you how to modify it exactly so that you're going to increase the probability of the first exposure with a person getting what you're looking for from them.
So, I mean, it sounds to me like you're just creating a course around rules, and
Yeah.
not necessarily exercises, right? You're not just throwing exercises together. You're creating rules so that people can make their own decisions, proper decisions. Does that sound about right?
100%. Yeah. We do some exercises. There's no way that you can't do it. But this is a course that is going to, it will frame your ability to reevaluate how things should work and to give you an operating system that should increase the probability of the person doing the drill that you want them to do at a high level, more as fast as you can possibly get them to do it at a high level. Um, or on the flip side, like I just look at it like when things go wrong, how do you fix it? And this is a systematic approach that will troubleshoot and fix things for you. Almost like if I buy a computer and all of a sudden the mouse isn't working, I can open up the manual and I can go to the part that says mouse, not, and I go to the page 35 where it tells me to go. And it's like, if the mouse is not working, press F8 key or whatever it is, and then it'll bring you to this other menu and it'll help you. So it's kind of like the same thing. Like if the person that you're working with is squatting and they're like, you know what, my knees hurt. It's like, okay, well, here's what you should do. Like based on some of the rules, it's like, well, the squat is in an exercise group that is referred to as expansion related exercises. And those require these specific joint actions to be successful. External rotation, flexion, abduction, plantar flexion, supination are the big 5 joint actions that go along with this. How can you look at this squat and feed those actions to it? Well, plantar flexion is an easy one. Elevate their heels. Supination is an easy one. Give them a kettlebell and have them hold on to the horns because that's going to supinate their hands. If I supinate their hands, I ER'd their arms. All of those things. So it's like, if you follow those things, then you're probably going to witness the person squatting after, and they're like, yeah, my knees don't hurt. It's no big deal. And you look at the exercise that you first had them doing, and it was like low bar, barbell, back squat. And it's like, uh, here's all the reasons why that's not a great choice. And, unless there's like here's how I would get somebody there. But it's like this person hasn't earned the right to go there. Like they don't own these joint actions that make sense for this exercise. And if they don't own those joint actions, well, I'm going to just feed them to them initially. I'm going to give them the layup version for this motor program. And I'm going to have them practice a bazillion layups. And after they do a bazillion layups, now I guarantee you, if I have them squat in some other way, shape, or form, it's going to look more like the layup with a slightly harder version of it imposed upon them now. And it's so to me, that's kind of this thing. It's I tried to make the most valuable and useful thing I possibly could for people. And that is not a seminar to me that's just like, hey, we're going to go over here now and we're going to pull these bands apart over and over. Like this is how I fix shoulders. It's like, no, this is like, this is a source code. Like this is an essence for a rule book, literally, that will walk you through how to get people to be able to execute movements as close to the archetype for how that movement should be expressed. And if you learn the rules, it won't just apply to the squat in this instance, or the deadlift in this instance, or the bench press. It should apply across the board to everything. So that if you get the rule book, now all of a sudden you can just look out and see exactly how to modify things.
Yeah, and I would think that would work very well for somebody who's a physical therapist to have those rules as well. Because I've been around a lot of physiotherapists, and a lot of them think they know exercise, but they've just been given exercises from whoever they learned from, right? But they don't necessarily have the same rule book that you're talking about, and it makes it harder because they paint themselves into a corner when it comes to identifying causation around injury.
You know what? Like I've screwed up more than I could ever imagine. Like my whole life, I've managed to do everything wrong, and then I'm always willing to kind of go back and reevaluate it and try to figure out what the hell, how did I screw this up this time? And after I do that, I try to make rule books to follow so that I don't actually use my own stupid brain in the process. Like this thing makes terrible decisions every single time. So when I'm alone and at a computer and able to really sit down and think things through as logically and thoroughly as I possibly can, I do a pretty damn good job of creating these very solid stepwise procedures. And then if I just follow the damn procedures when I'm working with people, the odds of me being successful go through the roof, versus trying to wing it, and I'm pretty good at winging it, quite honestly. Like I really am. Like I love anatomy and physiology and training and all that stuff. So when I'm working with somebody and I'm winging it, I'm more successful than not. But simultaneously, like I've definitely had my share of screw ups, and those drive me nuts. I want 100% success rate, and for the most part, when I follow my own rule book, it's 100% success rate. But I don't like it to just be me. I want to be able to create a rule book that anybody, if they actually read through it, they're going to get exactly the same results that I would get if I was there with this person. It's kind of like there's that thought experiment of the Chinese room. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, where you've got a guy that's in a room and it's got no windows and it's got just like a door slot, like the things you'd put mail through on the wall. And every now and then the slot opens and somebody puts a piece of folded paper in, and he takes it and he goes over to a desk, and there's a big thick book on it, and it's essentially a rule book, and it says So you see what's written on here, and then you go to the book, and like you have to go through each one, and then it says if you see this, then you write this on another piece of paper, and then when you finish going through the series of marks that got handed through the slot, and you've finished putting the proper response, slide that back through the slot. So what the guy inside the room doesn't know is that the messages coming through are in Chinese, and he's writing answers to these statements in Chinese, and they're going back and forth. And the question is, does this man know how to speak Chinese? And it's a weird question, you know? And it's like, well, no, but kind of, like he is in fact speaking Chinese to someone on the other side of this room. He doesn't know that he is, but he is. So it's kind of like that thought experiment. I remember reading it in multiple books on neuroscience, and I was like, why does this thing always come up in all these books? Like every single book references this Chinese room thought experiment, and in some ways, it drove me crazy enough to where I wanted to build a seminar that could do the same damn thing. Like if this then that, how far out can you build an if this then that logic tree? And that's sort of what this thing is in some ways. It's just that it's like as comprehensive as I could make it from the language of understanding trainable human movement.
But at the same time, when you have rigid rules, do you sometimes fear that people will be too rigid and not have the flexibility to make, decisions on the spot that may, in some cases differ from the rules? I
Yeah.
was going to ask you, like, what's the best example of you not following your own rules? Because I do that
Oh,
too. Like I'll
skip them all the time. Yeah. Well, I worked with a guy at Brooklyn College, and he had one of the great lines I've ever heard, which was, state troopers get to speed on the highway. So it's kind of like, if you've kind of created the rules and you're kind of the governing body behind it, yeah, you can skip through. But the funny thing is I usually still am following the rules in some ways as I do it. It's just that because I get these questions all the time. How long do I have to wait to progress people in these things? And I'm like, I don't have a good answer for you. But if you come to the seminar, you can literally watch me bring someone from the start to 8 steps beyond in literally 30 seconds. But I start where I should start, and I have an understanding of how to move through the stream to where I want to get. But I say that, like, I think that there is enough fluidity in this to where it's not like I'm ever saying, hey, the first when day one, when somebody comes in the room, the only exercise you do for hips is trap bar deadlift. It's not like that. It's more, your best option. So it's kind of, Bill has this propulsion arc that he teaches, and I use that. It lives inside this model, and I say your best bet, because the principles of the progression chapter and the progression information, it goes through the 10 principles, and then it goes into the propulsion arc, and it says this is its own animal, but incredibly useful. And I say go zone 1, zone 2, zone 3. Best way to kind of go through this. And zone 1 and zone 3 are these what Bill calls expansion zones, and zone 2 is a compression zone. And they have joint actions associated with them, and a respiratory component associated with it, as well as like muscle actions associated with them. So, I kind of went through the expansion ones earlier, but it's flexion of the joint, external rotation, supination, plantar flexion, and I'm missing one, but abduction. And so I say to myself, well, my advice is go with zone 1 first for your exercises. And so when I think about like a bench press, for instance, well, a good option is a dumbbell bench press. And why? Because it allows somebody to be able to supinate their hand more and externally rotate their arm more. And oftentimes I'll even have people put their feet up on the bench because it plantar flexes their ankle more, as opposed to being down on the ground with their feet pulled way back and making a big arch. It's like I think about all the possibilities in there, and I just say, hey, your best bet is probably to go that route. I kind of describe the squat, like my advice in the squat would be a goblet squat. Put the hands out in front, holding a kettlebell, put their heels up on a ramp, because it feeds all those things. It feeds plantar flexion at the ankle, it feeds supination and external rotation and flexion at the arms. And like, hey, look at that. It's just a way better squat on day one. You look like a genius because you got the person to do it right. I would not recommend an overhead barbell squat. It's in, zone one is having the arms down by the side, 0 to 60 degrees of flexion. Zone three is way up overhead. Zone two is straight out in front of you. I'm probably not going to front squat people with a barbell on day one, and I'm probably not going to overhead squat them on day one. I'm probably going to put them into about 30 degrees of humeral flexion with a goblet squat. And that's an easy place for them to manage based upon all these other biomechanical factors that live in other pillars. It's and for every exercise, like if I've got a horizontal pull, I'm probably going to give them a dumbbell row where again the hand is supinated. When I think about a deadlift, like most people are like, a trap bars is a lot easier for people, but why is it easier? Well, because your hands are supinated and your arms are externally rotated much more than pronated hands and IR'd arms for a barbell. Almost everything that has been invented in strength training for people when they're banged up feeds them these zone one concepts. Swiss bars, safety squat bars, it supinates the hands, it brings the arms down into a lower position of flexion, it ERs the humerus. Like literally almost everything I can think of feeds that zone. And it's almost like people tinkering, like, oh, this doesn't hurt so bad. And it's almost like now we kind of are getting a glimpse into why that is. But if I know why, and I have a better sense of the category of this thing, it's so much easier for me to be able to make executive decisions on how I would start somebody with an exercise. It's like, I don't think I'm going to go with the bar for bench press on day one. They haven't mastered the motions of the humerus in an easier place for them to do that from. So that to me is the beauty of it. And it's kind of like I was giving that Chinese room thought experiment, but I can't possibly work in every facility around the world. I don't know what kind of equipment people have. So the rule book I gave was one where it's like, if I happened to walk in your door and I took a look around at the equipment you have, what would I do with it? Like, here's the options I would probably go with for that.
Yeah, I remember I had attended it was a seminar back in like the 1990s. It was like with a guy named Ted Wong, who was one of Bruce Lee's students. And he was telling us a story that Bruce Lee could pick up any object and turn it into a weapon better than anybody he knew.
Yeah.
And that always stuck with me. It was like, okay, this guy just, satisfied all the rules of fighting that he could, pick up anything and make it a really effective weapon. So that's what it sounds like.
When you mentioned that, my mixed martial arts coach, he used to always say, hey, there's only so many ways you can break an arm. Okay, like it's pretty simple. Basically you put your crotch into like the backside of their arm, deep up towards their armpit, and you squeeze it with your legs and you pull it back. Like that's how you do it. Like, and I can get my crotch into the back of your arm when you're standing, when you're on your back, when you're on your knees. If I understand how that puzzle piece fits in there, boom, like if I see that opening, I know exactly what to do. And it doesn't matter where we start, but I know where it's going to end. But it's a similar thing. It's kind of like, you could probably go into a barn and figure out how to use some of the stuff in there to be able to teach running mechanics. You'd be like, oh, this hay bale will actually function pretty well for, whatever it is that would pop into your mind. To me, it's almost like I like these exercises of, I know my brain. If I could go into the barn and give somebody a good workout too. Like,
Yeah.
oh, we've got these hay hooks and we've got, bales and there's this wagon over here. Oh, perfect. I know exactly what to do. But can I go into my brain and pull out the intrinsic knowledge that would allow me to look around and kind of make these decisions? And can I actually write them out explicitly and make them as close to like rules as possible? That's kind of, I don't know why I sort of enjoy that process, but I do. It's kind of like I'm not good at crossword puzzles or jigsaw puzzles or Sudoku, but that to me is an active puzzle solving thing that that for whatever reason gives me a lot of mental satisfaction to try to do.
So this is happening November 20th and 21st. Is that right? That's the right
The
date?
21st and 22nd.
21st and 22nd. Okay, I want to make sure I get that right. And the best place to kind of get the information and figure out how to register is through your Instagram account.
It is. It's crazy. I just run everything through Instagram at this point. Like it's in the bio link. It'll take you right to where tickets are for either the in person in New York or the virtual. Which you were mentioning that you're going to be trying to turn your stuff over to virtual, and it's an interesting process to do that for
Uh,
sure.
well, I always I say to people, if I do an in person, I'm like you, like, I'm in the barn, right? I'm just like making stuff up as we go because you're reacting to the crowd and the questions. But when you do it like online as sort of like it's an on demand thing when people watch it at their own time, you got to make sure you're answering all the questions that could be answered,
Yep.
right? Rather than just dealing with the audience in front of you. So I found it's driving me a little insane, but I think I'm getting there. And the good thing is that when I did all my courses in like New York and Montreal, and I videoed all the practical sessions. So I have actual practical content that I have as part of the course now. So people can see a bit of that working on my feet. So it's nice to have some sort of live spontaneous component to it.
Yeah, I agree. Mine is like this is not a permanently offered product that I'm going to be delivering.
Hmm.
It'll be filmed live and it'll be available for 10 days. And then after that it's gone. I'm kind of hoping, well, for a few reasons. Like number one, this will be the last time that this seminar is taught this way. I'm finishing the book and I'm building more of a, I don't know, robust online platform for
Yeah.
it. Like I've already recorded during it was during the early kind of COVID lockdown stuff. I recorded uh, virtual lectures that correspond with it, like hours of this stuff. And I'm also like I'm building a certification out of this thing. So people are going to take the introductory material online. And then
Yeah.
once they finish the introductory stuff, then they'll be able to sign up for one of 3 seminars that's going to be taught on this. There'll be, I kind of broke it down before, athletic patterns, resistance training patterns, and control patterns are going to be the 3 courses. And then following attendance at, they'll be certified in the individual course. After they take all 3 courses, there's going to be a big online exam that will be pulled from the book. And once they pass the exam, now they'll have the full certification. So I try to make it as multimedia as I possibly
Yeah.
can.
I think that's key. I think that keeps people engaged. Um, and that's just how it's going to be, I think. So I was thinking along the same lines, like have all my theoretical stuff is online at your own time. And then post COVID, we have practical sessions that you can attend in different cities or whatever. So
Yeah.
as I'm figuring it out, but
Well,
I'm looking forward to seeing what you're going to do in a couple of weeks here.
it's
And
funny. I taught a mentorship thing during the quarantine stuff, and it went for 10 weeks, and it was a great experience. Like I kind of was tackling a lot of the different things, like ranging from goal setting to program design to business models to all these other things. And one of the areas that we got into was just being able to build these kind of scalable types of models and things of that nature, like essentially like trying to make money outside of just like your hourly income as a coach. And that there's been a lot of books written on this, and I haven't really read them, to tell you the truth, but I had somebody go through a number of the procedural book things. And the funny thing is that I don't know if you've read some of these books, these how to, online launch products or any of those things.
Yeah, I've dabbled, right?
Yeah.
And yeah,
But you follow, like, whether or not, because I've never read these things. I didn't realize I was basically following all these rules without knowing these rules. And you do too, like the way that you go about it. And I was saying, well, I mean, I know Derek, I'd be surprised if he read that specific book, but I feel like, the way that both of us mentally operate through things, like it just leads you there. It's almost just like this is just logic. Like,
well, and I honestly think like we're both kind of counterculture in terms of like education based on our history. So I think we kind of look at what was done in school, and I worked in university, you worked in a university, and you kind of see what's going on there. And then you're also in this private sector, spontaneous energy, whatever place as well. And then you kind of go, okay, well, you're just kind of picking things and you're going, okay, that works really well. And that worked well, maybe in an academic setting. And it just organically presents itself, I think. Right. I mean,
yeah.
that's the feeling I get. It's just experience is what we're talking about.
I think it might be that, and to me, I found it fascinating when I heard. I can't remember these damn rules, but it's almost like I didn't need to remember them because I'm already doing them in some
Yeah.
ways. But the fact that they were listed out, that someone had gone and made it their job to kind of figure out practices of people that can be successful with rolling out products and how to offer these things and what needs to be involved. And it's like, you check all the boxes with what you do. And I check damn near all of these boxes too without realizing that they were boxes. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Like if we were talking about this at the homeless shelter, we wouldn't have checked any of those boxes.
no, oh yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, it's true. um, so it is kind of an interesting thing when you get into this, but I'm enjoying. I don't know. I think that I am a fairly optimistic person at heart about from a big. I'm pessimistic, and I can be real nasty in the short term. But from a big picture perspective, I'm pretty optimistic, and I do look at most things as opportunities to learn something new
Yep.
or develop a
Yep.
new skill. And I do think that COVID has been that for a lot of people. Of hey, if I'm going to get stuck upriver and my raft is broken, well, I'm going to have to figure out a new mode of transportation. And I like my chances. I always bet on myself at those
Yep.
things.
Yep. Yep. No, absolutely. I can see that too in just everything you're presenting now. So yeah, I encourage everybody to jump on and see this seminar. And then the great thing is, like you said, it's going to just take off into different directions and evolve. And I think that's part of the learning process for everybody as well, is to see where you take it next. And I'm excited about that.
Well, I thank you very much for doing this talk tonight. It's definitely better than whatever's going on in that Pat's jet.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. So it was a good use of time. And yeah, thank you very much, Pat.
Hey, have a great night.
You too. Keep killing it, man.
Thank you. Same.
Take care.